Information is power.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear on 1010 WOLB
are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
Yeah, if you want to, that's just to hear the callers.
Okay.
So, I don't put mine until the callers. Okay. On 10:44.
Good afternoon and welcome to WOLB AM 1010. I'm your host, Tony Roberts, and this is Question of the Day. In the studios, we have Question of the Day engineer Uchenna Egby, Question of the Day content producer Guernica Williams, and special guests. Question of the Day.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Question of the Day. And happy holidays. Today's show is sponsored by Advanced Window Tinting. For all your tinting and vinyl wrap needs, Advanced Window Tinting has got you covered with 3 convenient locations around Baltimore, and they will even come to you. With a customer satisfaction rating of 4.9 stars out of 5. Advanced Window Tinting, fast, reliable, and very affordable. To schedule an appointment, call 410-630-3327. That's 410-630-3327. Or visit their website at www.advancedwindowtinting.com. With tax season fast approaching, Cephas, Thornton & Associates provide quality tax and accounting services for personal and business clients. For more information and to schedule an appointment, call 410-559-6883. That's 410-559-6883. Cephas, Thornton & Associates, your tax and accounting services. Now, teach me how to braid. 2-day hands-on braiding class. March 10th and 11th, the year 2018, 12:30 to 4 p.m. with Baltimore's own licensed cosmetologist Tasha Watson. To register, email dnzhairessentials@gmail.com. That's dnzhairessentials@gmail.com or contact her at 443-326-7537. That's 443-326-7537. In the studios today, we have Stephen Powell. And we're going to give him an opportunity to give you his resume.
I'm not even going to do that, man. I'm just going to tell you that since today is, for Kwanzaa is the purpose, it's Nia is the purpose. I'm just here clearly understanding what my purpose is on this planet. I am the Chief Program Officer of the National Cares Mentoring Movement, which was founded by Susan L. Taylor, the former editor-in-chief of Essence Magazine. And essentially, we are the nation's foremost leader in the recruitment, training, and engagement of African-American mentors. In the way that we focus our work, we really focus on breaking the cycle of Black generational poverty, which is really critical to transform the lives of the young people that we serve. And then we're also deepening our commitment to community healing by building a healing protocol and transformational work and holistic programming around mentoring to make sure that we can prepare the parents who serve the young people that we serve, as well as making sure that our young people are able to thrive from a social-emotional standpoint.
Wow. Powerful.
Yep, that's awesome. Welcome to our
yes.
show.
Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Question of
Thank
the
you.
Day. Yes. So that leads me into our question. There's so much crime going on all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Our young are easily influenced. So my question is, how do we boost and promote Black male achievement?
Man, that's a loaded question. I mean, because you can't really talk about crime without talking about poverty and systemic oppression and racism and redlining. And, so part of the work, as I mentioned before, is that we have to build a capacity in financial education and understanding of the young people and the adults in our community. Mentoring for us is not just focusing on building the capacity of the child. We have to build the capacity of the adults in the community. So when we talk about Black male achievement, the question then becomes, what lane of Black male achievement do you want to come in? We need people to pour into the spiritual development of our young people. We need people to pour into the workforce development of our young people. So does that mean that if you're a member in the community or a member of a fraternal organization or a member of a faith community, can you come in and teach young people soft skills, right? How to get a job, how to keep a job. Are there employers in the community that are willing to give our young people a chance so that they can thrive? Because this is not really about just helping them to be competitive locally. We're trying to make them globally competitive. But they have to feel like there's worth. And when you look back over the last 8 years, when we talk about our young men, all we hear are hashtags, because of all of the killings without any accountability. And it's really a message saying that their lives are not worth anything. So our mentors and those in our community, we need them to be positive opportunity brokers. Because when you talk about crime, I think back to a core lesson that my mom used to tell me. She said, if you want to see your future, show me your friend. So the first question I'm going to ask, who are you hanging around?
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
So if you're hanging around the wrong people who are going down the path of going into crime, then more than likely you're going to end up in that opportunity. We know where that ends, right? So it's really important that we teach our young people how to select the right circle of friends, particularly when you start talking about boys in elementary school and middle school. When I think back to high school, I kind of zoned my mom out, right? But those core lessons were already there. So I had people who were looking out for me even when I wasn't looking out for myself.
Right. And, because myself working in the school system, I see how so many young men are influenced by the gangs. Like, they rather hang with the gangs. They rather hang with the guys that's not going to class, that are walking the halls, that are into the drug business, versus they see the guy that's doing the right thing as a square. So it's like, how do we get them to change their thinking or start seeing these guys as more positive?
So when I think about the work of the National Cares Mentoring Movement and what makes it so critical is that we have a culturally anchored and trauma-informed curriculum. So the first thing that we have to do as adults is think about the lens in which we view our children, right?
Right.
So for every child that someone will say is negative, I can assure you that if we spend time and we allow love to be the anchor, you will find some positivity in that. Because essentially what young people are looking for are positive opportunities to showcase their skills and gifts. It's not about us reliving through them. It's about finding out what it is in them. So we talk about Nia and today's purpose. What is their purpose? Everybody who's on this planet has a defined purpose and something to do and to contribute to society. And when we look at our young boys, I have to say this because this is a conversation that I hear a lot from, single moms and other persons in the community. Can you teach my son how to pull his pants up? Can you teach my son how to dress differently? That's not really the most important thing, because I think when we talk about the loving people in our community, we have to be able to recognize what a tearless cry looks like. So a young man with his pants down, that's just the external. Because if I can come in, or you can come in, or anybody in the community can come in and pour into their spirits and help them lift up their spirit and lift up their cultural understanding, their pants never go down because they see themselves through a different lens, and that's where you start to see a shift in consciousness.
Amen. That's a good one.
So how do you pour into these African-American males as far as the spiritual piece? How does your organization deal with that?
So the way that we focus on this work is through group mentoring. We go into schools and we're looking at creating total school transformation. So it's not just about going into one classroom. If I could get 20 men from a local church, which is something that we've done around the community,
Nice.
and they're focusing on one-to-one mentoring, they could probably only get a classroom. But if I can get 20 men and build their capacity around group mentoring, they can probably get an entire grade level. So when we go into a school, we have what we call wellness mentoring circles. It's done during instructional time. There's a trained facilitator who's a counselor or social worker, and they're lifting up our curriculum, which was designed by a 60-member brain trust. It's called A New Way Forward, Healing What's Hurting Black America. Within that curriculum, there are 10 pillars. Spirituality is one of them. Media Watch is one. Mentoring is one. Community is one. So there are different things that we really believe that we need to have our young people focus on, but they're not going to be able to get these lessons that were systemically removed from curriculum. They're not going to be able to get these things unless we can create a safe space for them. And this is what wellness mentoring circles do. We also do wellness mentoring circles for the adults in our communities. Because when we talk about engagement of mentors, we have to also look at some of the pain that our men and women are carrying before coming in, and we have to make sure that they're well and healthy before we put them in front of our young people, because we don't want them to project pain on our young people.
Right.
Right.
My question is, though, is like I'm playing devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Why do the schools not want prayer in their schools when we have local churches who are willing to come in? Like when I first started at the high school I was at, I saw this young man who had Bible study. He was only there maybe for a month, and then it just like disappeared.
Well, I think we're going to see a shift in that. I mean, I think the word is clear on that. And from my perspective, one thing I will say, the reason why I understand my purpose, because I am unapologetic about my blackness, and I'm also unapologetic about who I serve. And in order to do that, so I will walk into a corporation or a community center or any environment, and I'm going to be very frank and candid about, how spirituality supports us. Now, the biggest challenge is that when we talk about building the capacity of those in the community, we also have to build a capacity of faith institutions to operate differently. For example, you can go into a community and you can ask young men, and this is something that actually happened, what do you think about black middle class worshipers? And they'll say, you guys come into our hood, y'all get y'all praise on, and then you bounce. So if I'm a young man and I'm in pain and I'm struggling, there's nothing that you've done that will make me be interested in what's going on in the four walls of that church. So for us, it is so important to make sure that we can build the capacity of those within the walls of the church or the synagogue or the temple. I want to be very inclusive here, because again, when you talk about what can we do in 2018, we have to focus more on similarities than on differences.
Yes.
We dwell on differences, right? So when we say faith community, I'm talking about all communities of faith that are willing to stand, because as the word is clear on, you will know them by their fruit.
Yes.
So if you look down in Washington and someone is telling you that they are quote unquote Christian, but their policies don't reflect that, this is why it's so important for us to teach our young people to have critical thinking skills so that they can discern the actions from the words. So it's not about speaking black male achievement, it's living black male achievement. Right. So if you are understanding the worth of the young person that you're purported to serve, if you're not afraid of the communities that you're supposed to serve, if you're committed to serving the least of these, then you're not going to walk outside the walls of a church or a synagogue or a temple and look past the pain in your community. You're going to be a bridge, because when you're a bridge, you're a blessing.
Right.
Wow. When
Callers.
you're a bridge, you're a blessing.
Callers, call in 410-481-1010. Want to hear your thoughts. What do you feel is your biggest challenge when it comes to trying to get people to buy into what you have to offer?
The biggest challenge, I mean, again, I think it just depends on what group you're talking about, right? Because you can talk about people outside of the race. You can also talk about the challenges with people inside the race. So we have to understand that we are suffering from the vestiges of slavery, right? And there's something that Susan Taylor, the CEO of our organization and founder, always says. She says, you have to see people for their wounds and not their behavior. If you see people for their wounds, you tend to be able to keep forgiveness on a recycling in your spirit. So you're not really bringing pain and carrying those challenging circumstances along with you. So you see your interaction with people differently. And when we talk about shifting consciousness, we have to figure out, people don't know what lane they can come in to support the work, right? There's some people who are not going to go into the hood. We just know that.
Right.
We don't need you to. Maybe your role is to serve as a board member for an organization, help them build capacity. Maybe your role is to write a check. Maybe your role is to be a bridge and connect a local organization with a corporate sponsor so that they can continue the work. Because one of the things that has been painful to our communities, specifically as it relates to mentoring, is this drive-by programming. We don't need more drive-by programming. We don't need cute campaigns. And I'm not talking about the campaign for Black Male Achievement, because the campaign for Black Male Achievement, because their founder, Sean Dove, is so spiritually anchored, he has recognized the importance of creating a safe space for leaders and all those in the field to sustain the work. So If you're only looking at coming into black male achievement because there's a grant telling you to, then we don't need you in the work, right? Because there is a significant responsibility that we have to support our work. Kwanzaa, we talk about cooperative economics. So how do you sustain the work? So is it the faith institution taking up a quarterly offering to support a mentoring project once the grant ends from a foundation? I mean, here in Baltimore, we are incredibly blessed to have a Greater Baltimore Cares affiliate led by Armando Say and Kathy Say and Melissa Dash, and they're doing fantastic work around STEM and creating opportunities for our young people to thrive in the field of STEM because they can see where the jobs are going to be years from now. So in addition to supporting them around social emotional development, they're also very focused on disrupting generational poverty. And one of our key funders, Eddie and Sylvia Brown, are here in Baltimore as well. So I want to be very intentional about lifting them up because they also understand the need to sustain our work. And so what I would say in terms of a challenge is that there's this paralysis analysis and people not understanding that there's a lane for you and we can help you find what that lane is. Right. Now, as it relates to people outside of the race, it's important for them to understand that we don't need them to be our heroes. We need them to support the local heroes that already exist. We need them as allies because there are conversations that they need to have with one another that we cannot have, and those conversations are welcome. But there are so many community heroes around that just need to have an investment poured into them.
Right.
And throughout our country, the National Cares Mentoring Movement, we have 58 affiliates around the country that are what we call our volunteer army of love. And their job is to recruit, train, and deploy mentors to the young people in those communities that are in need.
So we have a caller on the line. Maurice, welcome to Question of the Day.
God bless everybody. Happy holidays.
Happy
New Year.
Happy New Year's.
Oh, man, I totally agree with everything that brother is saying. I know Sean Dove, excellent role model for our community and everything that he's been able to do through the Black Male Initiative, Black Male Achievement. When I was working with Youth Build, which is an international youth development model, the work was just phenomenal. So, but also I want to speak to some numbers, right? So in Baltimore, black males, African-American males make up 29% of the population, but also make up 79% of all of the homicides in Baltimore City. And so what I've been experiencing with people in the community is the first thing they say is, we got to do something with these kids, these hoppers, they running wild, they this, they that. But when I looked at the numbers recently, it's the highest target group is the 25 to 34 group, and then it's the 19 to 25 age group. And so those who are 18 and under, they're in the fourth category. But the top two categories in terms of homicides in this city has been basically 25 to 34, and then 19 to 25. So how do we engage those people, those men, so that we can bring down the homicide rate? Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Maurice.
And thank you, brother. So the first thing I want to say is we want to be very clear on the type of language that we use when we describe our children. So the next time somebody says these kids, my challenge to you is to challenge them to say our kids, right? Just remove that barrier, because when you start using language that affirms that the children in our communities are our responsibility, there's no longer a barrier for us to overcome. Now, the other piece to this is that we have to understand and take into historical context why our communities are what they are. So I'm not discounting or removing the fact that we do need people in our communities to be responsible and take care of one another. But when you look at the history of the United States and why we were brought here, you have to bring that into context, because we were profit before we were able to make profit. And so when you look at the fact that we went from slavery to the black codes, from black codes to Jim Crow, from Jim Crow to mass incarceration, And yet, in this day and age, we are still challenged with understanding why we're here and what our existence is. So we have to be able to understand the game, right? Because until you understand the roots, it's kind of like, if you planted an apple seed today, you're not going to come back 20 years later looking for oranges. So there were seeds that were planted that have allowed these issues to happen in our communities for a defined reason. So if they're building prisons and you have prison companies that are suing governors because they're not at full occupancy, then what does that say about the allowance of these things? So we need to have people who are more outraged, not just about the killing, but also about the fact that we have schools that are under-resourced under our watch. We have kids that are undereducated under our watch. And if our children are under-resourced and undereducated and they are graduating without the proper skills to thrive and to support their communities, what else do you think is going to happen besides crime? Which is why poverty has to be a focus. When we talk about Dr. King, so we're getting ready to go into January, we have to stop romanticizing what King did and talk about the true things that he was grappling with and some of the things probably which cost him his life. The Poor People's Campaign. I took my 2 daughters down to Memphis last year because I wanted them to see the Lorraine Motel. And my 5-year-old kept asking me, why did they kill him if he was trying to do the right thing? But my 10-year-old, her understanding is, wow, this brilliant leader who had a PhD from Boston University and Morehouse, an undergrad, he could have left Boston University and ran a large church and just kicked back, but he didn't do that. He dug in because he knew what his purpose was. So talking about Nia, not only did he do that, he was standing for sanitation workers, right? So you're talking about somebody who came from a well-to-do family who understood that he had a significant place to play in our history. So right now, we need our people in our community to be on the right side of history. Stop romanticizing our leaders. Understand the true challenges that they face. Understand what Malcolm and Martin were focusing on before they died. And it was economic empowerment. It was absolutely economic empowerment. Until we start spending our money differently, no one's going to take us seriously, because right now our money goes into our hands and right outside of our communities. So until it's starting to circle through our community, until we can trust one another, that we can serve one another at the highest level possible. We also have to forgive one another. Sometimes we'll go into a Black-owned business, and because they don't have the capacity to serve, we write them off, but we forgive everyone else. Mm-hmm. We have to change that way of thinking. And until we can do that, there's going to be challenges. And until we focus on economic empowerment, you will see crime in certain depressed communities, because that depression is allowed for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just switching gears a little bit, I see that you write for the Good Men Project, and you have an initiative called Mentor. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Mentor, with the tagline Recruit, Reclaim, Restore, was an initiative that the Campaign for Black Male Achievement supported in my former role when I was the Executive Director of Mentoring USA. And essentially, we created the campaign because when you go into corporations or many communities around the country, Black men are in dire need by many organizations to serve as mentors, regardless of what organizations you're talking about. And I recognized that the faith community was an integral part of filling that gap. So there were 3 levels of engagement for the Mentor Project. The first was to recruit men from the faith community to adopt a local school and serve as mentors. So that was number 1. So again, working outside the walls of the church. The second phase was fatherhood capacity building. So we worked with an organization called Fathers Incorporated, which is also under the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, to help them create safe spaces for the fathers in our community to re-engage. Because see, what happens when we don't understand the multi-layered root causes of disconnection, anger, a father who may have walked out, right? So you're dealing with your own abandonment issues. And so we just write off the men and just say they're not interested. But who's created safe spaces for them to heal before we put them before our young people? So the fatherhood capacity building was the second piece. And then the third piece was peer mentoring. We don't need to wait until somebody's 25, 30, 40 years old, to introduce the concept of mentoring, right? Or the concept of Sankofa, lifting as we climb. When I think back to, and I think I shared this with you guys before we started the show, I chose an HBCU, I chose to run track and field, I chose a certain path in my life because of the peer mentors that were present. You know, because of Brian Gibbs, who gave me a box of materials from a black college fair, and I started to flip through them. And then I had an interest in Morgan State initially to run track, and I ended up going to Howard, right?
Right.
And so now I'm in a space at the National Cares Mentoring Movement where we're training 16 HBCUs, helping STEM majors to train middle school boys all around the country. And so the peer mentoring piece, I believe, is critically important, and it's also important because it sets a certain tone and environment in the school. The other piece about mentor that I thought was significant, it also created a lane for men to mentor episodically. So everybody's not going to be able to commit to 4 hours per month, which is what most organizations want. But what is it that you can do as a quote-unquote super mentor, or someone who comes in once in a while? Or what is it that you can do as a returning citizen? So you went into the system. You're not going to be able to pass the background check of most organizations, so we can't place you in front of our children one-to-one, but we can give you an opportunity to heal and share your story as a credible messenger, which might prevent a young child from creating the same mistakes.
That would be powerful, because so many young men who've made mistakes and gone on to prison, when they come home, that was one of the things when Dr. Steve Perry was on the show. We talked about how guys who have been incarcerated would be a benefit to share their story, because like they've taken away the Scared Straight program. Like I used to work at the place Charles Hickey School, where we used to take a group of young men into the jail and see how things went. But now it's like that's gone. So it's, again, you know, those guys would really help.
And you got to bring into it historical context, because if you look at what happened during the crack epidemic, right? Crack did what slavery couldn't do. It broke families apart.
Right.
And it also sent tons of men into the system for possession.
Yes.
Right? But now, present day, when we look at the opioid situation, there's a level of empathy and sympathy that's given to those, and as it should be, that was not afforded to those that were impacted by the crack epidemic, right? And we know the reason was because they needed to fill those prisons for profit.
Something you said earlier in reference to having a better understanding of people who are dealing with poverty. And it's almost like when you go before a judge, they don't take none of that in consideration. When you're in a school setting and you might be struggling with staying focused in class because you might not have heat, lights, whatever the struggles may be at home.
How can you do your homework if you don't have light?
And it's like no one takes these things into consideration. And then even in the school system at times, they don't even want the teachers to know. It's like if you're not the actual social worker, you might have a kid in your class that's dealing with some serious issues that you have no clue about. And then it's like, how can you be effective in trying to reach this kid? So it's almost like the system is so broken. How can it be fixed if we choose to keep doing the same thing over and over?
It's broken for who?
Right.
Yes.
Some people it's working exactly the way they want it to work.
That is true.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that you asked a question about being broken. How can we? One of the answers, not, the answer is mentoring. So through mentoring, because we're into breaking cycles. How does mentoring break cycles, and how does mentoring change the future of our Black males? How do you see it working in that way?
Again, it's creating a bridge. It's creating a bridge. We have certain divides that we have to get through in order for our young people to thrive. And one of them is class, right? There are people who could do more who are not doing more because they're suffering with their own pain of re-engaging and going back into some of their communities where all they remember is pain, right? The pain of poverty. So we need people to heal before they enter and are interacting with our young people. But we have to be very careful about not trying to project our own dreams on our young people, but finding out what it is that they want to do. You may be mentoring a child who's not going to go to Howard or Morgan, right? But they might be fantastic with their hands, right? A trade school might be the option for them, right?
Yes.
And I could tell you, if I had to think back to this past year, I paid a plumber and an electrician more than I paid a doctor.
Right.
So we're talking about giving them opportunities to thrive and create and build families. We need families to thrive in our, that's what builds a legacy.
Right.
So I think it's about finding out what they want to become. Because again, I know a lot of adults who are professionals. I know a lot of adults in a variety of different fields who are unhappy because they're not living their own dreams. They're living somebody else's dreams. So we don't need mentors to be dream stealers. We need them to be positive opportunity brokers.
Yes. So.
And these mentors are trained, right?
They're trained. And I think that's one of the, not only do we want to focus on the initial mentoring training, we need to make sure that there is ongoing training and support for those persons that are working with young people.
Right.
We don't want to make the assumption that, this person is a working professional. They're going to know how to work with middle school kids in this particular environment, right? They may have been disconnected from some time, and they also have to go into the relationship with the skill of an active listener, understanding that the young people are also going to teach us what we need to learn about how to deal with them and help them thrive in their communities.
Right. Let's take this call.
Yes. Caller, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Great. Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year.
I just tuned in late on your show, but what the young man is saying is so true. I do one-on-one in Baltimore County Public Schools.
Okay.
And what I do find out, like you were saying, that nobody addresses the children's needs. They focus on the behavior of a child. They never focus on the talent of a child. I had two young men that I had last year, and both of them, I found out one was gifted in music, and I couldn't say anything because of my job title. They felt that I was underneath for the teachers, and I didn't know what I was talking about. So I talked to the music teacher, and she said that she knew, but she couldn't say anything either because they wouldn't believe what she was saying. And she was the music teacher. This young man could play like he was in college, and she even said that herself.
Wow.
And all the other children couldn't play the recorders. You know how when you first start out playing, we used to call it the flute. They call it recorders now. And he was right on tune with everything she told him to play.
Wow.
Even with the piano. But he had a behavior issue, which I found out he wanted to live with his father, which his father didn't live here in the state of Maryland. And I don't think the father wanted to deal with it. And the mom and the grandparents did not explain to him what was going on. He was in the 3rd grade. So he would come in and jump on tables and stuff. A good student, when I took him out for a break and everything, he was good, and he could write. I mean, this young man could write, but all they thought about was his behavior. And then the other young man, I thought he couldn't read because he told me he didn't like reading. But he was the top reader in this 4th grade class.
Yes.
The teacher told me that, and his father was in prison. And his mother didn't come up when they needed her to come up for him. She wouldn't come up. She came up for the younger brother, but she never come up for him. So he felt like he was being neglected. So he would tear out the classroom.
Wow.
And when I took him out and talked to him and found out, and like you were saying, be an active listener. Sometimes I wouldn't say nothing. They told me so much that it hurt. It made me cry on the inside because I didn't want them to see me crying on the outside. I mean, I was like, how can people do this to children? Because I never grew up like that.
Right.
And, and it was like, oh, my God, all these issues. And they minor issues, but they want to put them on drugs. Can I be honest?
Yes.
Because what they do is they threaten these mothers. Most of them are single mothers, and they're working 2 and 3 jobs. If you don't put your child on this child can't go to school. And then they go take them to court. If they say, no, I'm not going to put my child on this medication, they take them to court, and they are forced to put these children on medication.
And, a lot of times these mothers and fathers are not aware of the manipulation.
Yes.
They're not educated enough. And so that's why they do that, because they're ignorant to the fact that I have to choose whether or not I want my child in school or, am I going to put them on medicine? What am I going to do?
Right.
So.
And that's why holistic, first of all, I just want to thank you for calling me young man. But this is why holistic wraparound support is important, because when I think about the circumstances that you've described, the question then becomes, what can we do as a community to have this young man see his future outside of his current situation? So are there mentors who would help to take him to opportunities where he can see what a life in the arts looks like, whether it's at a conservatory, whether it's at the theater? And I'm saying this, being married to a wife who was a Broadway performer, but I think about what her parents did to allow her to have that opportunity. So what is it that we can do to help him thrive in that environment? And then the other piece is that our young people, they have to have examples in their lives to see the outside. I've worked in many schools around the country where there are not a lot of men in the schools, and the one man who's in the school sometimes has the responsibility of being the disciplinarian. So you have boys who will get in trouble just to have an interaction with the only man in the school, which is a problem. So what mentors can do, again, as positive opportunity brokers, finding their lanes, I always say just work with the school leadership and get a group of men to just walk the hallways so that you can change the narrative. The young people can see that there are men in their communities that are willing to stand in and support them. It's important for our young people to not just have a counter narrative of who they are, but a corrective narrative about who they are, and to also teach them how to be the authors of their own future.
Thank you, ma'am, for calling in. We have Quentin on the line. Welcome, Quentin.
How you doing?
How you doing, man?
Quentin.
Welcome to the question of the day.
Hi, Quentin.
Hello, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
No
Yes, sir. We would love your input as well. How do we boost and promote black male achievement?
But first, we want you to give us, our listeners, a little bit of background to who you are, what you do, your book.
Sure. Well, I'm born and raised in Baltimore. I put a book out May of this year called Strong in the Broken Places. It was a memoir, pretty much detailing my experiences growing up in Baltimore, raised by a single mom. My father was a heroin addict. Very much, what was described. I think one of the callers talked about, the kids with behavioral issues. That was me growing up. I went to schools in Baltimore County. So I went to, schools that were predominantly white, and I experienced, racial divide and prejudice and, racism on all fronts. So I also went through, I was diagnosed with severe generalized anxiety and panic disorder and mild to severe major depressive disorder. I spent 2 years addicted to prescription medication, attempted suicide, and then I found sustainable health and healing through, different modalities, something that I consider my trinity of wellness, which is yoga, meditation, and changing my diet. So I feel like one of the most important things that we could do to support black male achievement, specifically, is to stop hiding behind this mask of masculinity.
Yes.
That's right.
Growing up, as a black male, as a male, period, we're told to suck it up and to be strong and be a man, and that men aren't supposed to cry and men aren't supposed to have feelings. And I know throughout my entire life, I was tormented and made fun of if I felt emotion. So the only emotion that I was able to display was anger.
Wow.
And that came out in every aspect that you can think of. Fighting in school, throwing chairs at teachers, despite the fact that I was accepted in the middle school magnet programs and all kind of things. Academically, school wasn't challenging for me, but my teachers and the guidance counselors and everybody, made me feel a certain way about having thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So I was forced to kind of like put those things to the side. And as a result, it came out in other things. It came out in my addictions. It came out in even the way that I treated women. It came out in, in every other area of my life. And I feel like now as a father myself, I teach my children that it's okay to have an emotion. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be vulnerable. We were taught that vulnerability is weakness, when in actuality, vulnerability is true strength, because it takes a strong man to be honest enough with himself to acknowledge his feelings and to be able to display those and express those, in positive ways. So when you don't have an outlet, chastised and criticized, told that you're too emotional, or that as a child at 11, 12 years old, you need to man up. I didn't have an example of what that looked like. My father was in prison, and when he wasn't in prison, he was in the streets getting high. So to man up to me would be to look at the man that I was supposed to look at as an example and do what he did. So it was like we didn't have an example. I didn't have, any outlets. So ultimately it came out in anger and frustration. And I think one of the most important things is to change the narrative of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be male? Wow. From an emotional and a psychological perspective. We're criticizing children, and then putting them out into a world where they're going to be criticized even more. Mm-hmm. Like, how are we actually preparing them
for
any level of success, outside of being in the streets, when we're not arming them with the tools necessary to first understand themselves, deal with their own traumas and the things that they've experienced outside the confines of a school. Even the school grading system is, to me personally, it's not designed for someone's success.
Right.
It's a judgment call.
Right?
Totally. If you don't do X, Y, Z, or and you get an A, a B, a C, or a D, and that's supposed to determine who you are. Mm-hmm. Like, we take that personal. When I went to school and I was a D student, so because I was a D student, I was put in remedial English classes, and I wrote a book.
Right.
I'm a kid. I was in a remedial English class and grew up to write a book, to be a published author. Obviously, that's not what my life was meant to be. That's not that was not a judgment of the character or a grading, a scale of what I was able to accomplish, because my counselors didn't counsel. My teachers didn't teach. They criticized. And I think we're setting a bad example, especially for our males, our black men, and our black males out here, if we're telling them that they need to be an example of something that they don't see on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
I agree.
If we're telling them that they can't be emotional, they need to man up, and you're being a woman if you cry, like that's right. Sending the wrong message.
Right. So you mentioned manning up. I want both of you to answer this, and as well as Tony. What does manning up now look like for you, Quentin?
Manning up to me right now means being open and honest about my responsibilities for myself and the people around me.
Awesome.
For me, manning up meant being able to walk away from a lifestyle and being man enough to look in the mirror and say, this is what you were supposed to do as a father.
And what is that? What was that lifestyle for our listeners?
Hustling, living the streets.
Right.
As I say, throwing bricks at the penitentiary, trying to live up to what people felt I should be doing, and that, to me, that wasn't being a man.
And for me, manning up, and Quentin, I just want to say thank you for everything that you provided, some very powerful nuggets in your response. But for me, being raised by a single mom, my father passed when I was 5, so this is a critical conversation because everyone's trying to figure out how do you become a man. But when you think about, again, the historical context, when our African ethos is stripped from us, then there's no true activity around rites of passage. Then how do we expect our young men to understand what it looks like to become a man? And the reason why this is played out in our mentoring work, I've done mentoring trainings with a group of African-American men, and I'll ask them, when did you all become a man? Everybody had a different answer. You ask a Jewish male the same question, they have one answer.
Yes.
So we have to create safe spaces where we can have these conversations and allow men to be vulnerable. So in the context, when I hear the term man up, for me it is keeping my life issues in priority. God, family, community.
Yes.
That's what manning up means for me. Just understanding those 3 things are in perfect order and alignment, and then everything manifests itself from that for me. Now, the other piece around the conversation around manning up is when we talk about black boys or young men in communities, you always hear mothers sometimes say, little so-and-so is the man of the house. Little so-and-so is the man of the house. He's 8, he's 9, he's 10. He is not the man of the house. So in order for us to properly support our young people, we have to allow them to be children and not rush them into manhood, because the wrong circumstances can have a whirlwind effect for that particular household. My mom, for me, I felt like I became a man when I was able to take her car to the mechanic and get her a price that was lower than what she got from the mechanic himself. And I knew nothing about cars. So I understood what the conversation or what the presence of a young man meant in having those type of conversations. But if you take a young man in a certain community and he's watching his mother struggle, and then person X comes along and say, hey, little man, I'm going to give you this bag, just run it down the block, I'll give you $200. So in that young person's mind, he's thinking, wow, this is my way to start attacking poverty in my household. But he's not understanding the consequences to his actions.
Right.
Because there's no, so the shifting in consciousness has to happen at that point, and our young people have to understand the consequences to their actions. And all of that has changed. When you and I went to college, when you went to college, we didn't have social media. Right? So what does that mean around resolving conflict? Because again, masculinity, what you say to me, what you do to me, what you post about me, you stepped on my so-and-so, and we're ready to blow someone's brains out because we don't understand how to resolve conflict. And conflict is going to exist, but how we resolve it should be done in a manner that has dignity for everyone.
I like what you said about, how we raise our young men in the homes. And I say young man, I have a 17-year-old, so I'm used to referring to him as a young man at this point. But Dr. Marco Clark was just on the show a couple weeks ago, and he said that was one of his points, that we need to allow our young boys, our young black males, to be young children in the home while they can, because the world is going to chew them up and tell them, certain things about being a man. So it's important for us as parents, as teachers, educators, to cultivate the children within them. I think a lot of times they're influenced by, like you said, media, which tells them you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to grow up fast. So that messaging is very important when we're dealing with these young men.
That is critically important. And even when you talk about mentor training, everyone who knows me in this space understands there's certain words I just never use to describe our young people. Right. I never use the term at risk. I get it. I understand why people use it for grants and proposals. But if you told me every day that I was at risk, I would actually start to believe that. So if I want you to be a high-performance vehicle, do you put unleaded into a high-performance vehicle? No. You put premium. So what type of premium language are we pouring into our young people?
Premium language. I love
that.
Love it.
Now, how does this impact the community, right? And again, we have a zillion case studies now. When you look at Tamir Rice, when you look at what happened in Ferguson, when you look at the language that the police officer used to describe Michael Brown, he was an animal, he was a beast. But if all you hear is at risk about the community that you're supposed to serve, then all of those things are going to pour into your spirit. So what we need and what we want is for the community at large to see our boys as their children.
So in other words, we need to find the language, find a new language.
Find a new language.
Yes.
Like, something you said earlier, Quentin, about being a D student. I, too, am a published author who, again, no one would have believed it. I'm not a fan of the school curriculum because I feel that it doesn't prepare our men for the real world. I feel like it sets them up for failure. I work in the school system, and I see students who are in the 12th grade who can't read. But it's like, well, how did he get to the 12th grade? And then they put these programs together to get all this money where these kids take tests online where they can use their phone just to get them out the door, and we keep the money coming in. And it's like now you have this young man into the world who don't know how to fill out an application, who don't know how to read. And if you even ask him, what do you want to do? He can't even answer the question. So it's like the system is setting him up for failure. Some don't even take the time or consideration to say, like Stephen said earlier, what is it you want to do? What do you like to do? We just say, okay, this is what it is. This is what you must do.
We have to tap into it.
Yeah, we we don't provide them an opportunity to be the authors of their own lives.
Right.
You know, we create these standards and we force people to live within those. You know, that's confinement. It's almost as if the school system today is mimicking the prison system, because it's all about economics. It's all about how many people we can push through, what the test results are looking like, what the scores are looking like. It's not treating people as individuals. I was one of the highest performing students to go into the school that I went into. Now, around the time that I started going to this middle school, which I'm not going to name, but it was a really prominent school in Baltimore County, my father was locked up for the second time. I was actually old enough to recognize what was happening. So my academic performance was, impacted by what was going on in my personal life. But instead of anyone trying to understand that, because I didn't fit into the confines of these parameters that they set, I was deemed to be a derelict. I was deemed to be at risk. I was deemed to be, I had behavioral issues and I was a delinquent. So I was put into these remedial classes not because of my academic performance, because I'd already proven that I was smart enough to be there. I was put there because of my propensity to react to certain situations because of what I was going through personally. And I think that's within the school system itself, and sometimes within family structures.
That's right.
That's where we're, in my opinion, that's where we're faltered. That's where we're failing. Because it's like, life is not, life, what Forrest Gump said, life is like a box of chocolates.
Yes.
Like, that's one of the realest statements I've ever heard in my life, because, I learned this in the yoga class, and my teacher had told me, your reaction to pain does not change the fact that it exists. Your reaction to pain determines the impact that it has in your life. So it's very similar to what was said before. We don't teach how to react properly. We don't teach how to adequately, resolve. We don't teach conflict resolution. We criticize and we critique.
Right.
And even when it comes in the form of a microaggression, right? So you're
absolutely
in a certain environment and someone says something to you, how do you respond, right? And what are the consequences for the way that you respond? Those things are so critical.
Absolutely. And like right now, I'm working as a program director for an organization in New York City that teaches yoga and mindfulness practices to inner city schools throughout the 5 boroughs.
What's the name of the organization?
It's called Bent on Learning.
Okay.
And the reason being is, from what I experienced myself, being able to take a step away and learn how to refocus your thinking, reframe your reactions, can change the entire dynamic of that conflict. So, teaching a child meditation or allowing them to learn how to be mindful. Mindfulness is nothing more than being honest with yourself in a moment.
Right.
That's all mindfulness is. It's being aware of your feelings and your possible reactions and shifting that to be to create the most positive resolution possible.
And what this brother just said is exactly what we get out of our wellness mentoring circles. Mm-hmm. Our wellness mentoring circles are gender specific. When the young people come into circle, they engage in what is called Harambe, just game playing for about 3 minutes, and then they go into Sanko for breathing and meditation before we get into the pillar activity. And the reason why this is so important, I was in South Florida and I met a young man with our South Florida Rising program who said to me, man, my mom was bugging out and I just went into my Sanko for breathing. So it's not about just teaching them how to have that peace in the classroom, but these are practical things that they can take home and utilize as well.
We need this in all schools. Because I honestly believe if kids had that moment where they could meditate,
that's right,
it
would tone a lot down. But, that's a whole nother.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right.
Meditation over detention.
Right.
That's right.
Instead of punishment, we're teaching them something different that they can carry on for the rest of their lives, because they're going to be faced with challenges, and it's not, eliminating the challenge that's going to create success or failure. It's knowing how to react to those challenges in a positive way that gets the best result.
Right.
And so everything that was mentioned, this is why our relationship with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement is so important, because in the Oakland Unified School District, we're recruiting men from the community to go in and do wellness mentoring circles. In Sacramento, the same thing. In Seattle, our Seattle Cares affiliate just became the lead designated entity to be the bridge for recruiting African American men and deploying them in. So this is something that we're replicating all throughout the country because there's a dire need for it.
Right. Quentin, really quick, strong in the broken places. What does that mean?
For me, to be strong in the broken places, it came because, growing up, as a black man, I felt broken. Everywhere I turned, I saw poverty, deprivation, struggle. Even when I went to these county schools and I saw another side of it, because I didn't look like them and because I didn't come from the same economic status that they came from, I felt broken. I felt very much like the community I grew up in. I grew up in the Park Heights community. Riding up and down Park Heights between Wiley and Belvedere, you see a bunch of brokenness.
Yes.
Now, so in order for me to be able to change my situation, my life, and thus, get to the point now where I can change, the trajectory of my people and my communities, I had to find strength in my brokenness.
Okay.
It's just like, when you break a bone, and they put a cast on it, they put a cast on it and it fuses that bone back together. It's not to say that it won't break again, but you'll find additional strength as you work that bone, as you work the muscles around it, as you strengthen everything surrounding that bone, the likelihood of you breaking it again in the exact same place decreases.
Right.
Because the body is designed during the healing process to make it stronger than it was before it was broken. So that's the ideology that came to me with the title of that book. It's like, in order for me to be able to, surpass a level that I even couldn't have imagined myself, I had to find strength in my brokenness, and therefore I can help others find strength in theirs.
Really quick, tell listeners how they can get a copy of your book.
Strong in the Broken Places, it's available everywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon. Okay. It's in Barnes & Noble. You can get it, Books A Million, iTunes, I think what it's called, iBooks. Mm-hmm. It's literally Kindle. It's literally everywhere books are sold.
And what are your social media? How can people reach you through social media or connect with you?
Quentin Vennie. It's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Also my website, QuentinVennie.com. QuentinVennie. Okay. Everything.
Thank you. And you're up next. Tell our listeners how they can contact you and, connect with you on social media.
Sure. My social media on Twitter is Mr. Mentor Steve. On LinkedIn, it's Mr. Mentor 420. On Facebook, it's Mr. Mentor 420. We also have cares_mentoring on Twitter. And then caresmentoring.org is our website. I just want to make sure I promote that because in January it's National Mentoring Month. We have our annual gala, which is being hosted by Maxwell.
Okay.
And
nice.
we are honoring Cicely Tyson, Tarana Burke, and Reverend Barber. So this is really a very big social justice effort for us. It's on January the 29th at Ziegfeld.
And that's in New Jersey?
In New York.
In New York.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And if they want to purchase tickets, is that?
caresmentoring.org.
Okay. Yep. Awesome.
And for those of you who want to follow us or listen to the show again, we're on Facebook, Tony R. Qotd, or you can go to YouTube, Tony Robertson. You can catch the show if you missed it or you want somebody to listen in because this show was very, very powerful.
Yes.
These two young men.
Mm-hmm. Young men.
Young men. Brother, every time I think I got a story, Quentin, I hear another story, man, that got mine beat, bruh.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes,
I just want to say also for everyone who's listening, in terms of what to do better in 2018, I would have to say self-care. There's so many people who are ill and checking out. If there's anything you can do, check in on a brother and encourage him to go to the doctor, encourage a sister to go to the doctor, but self-care, you mentioned yoga, Quentin, and I thank you for that. It's so important in this work because we tend to give so much away trying to do what's right, that we have to make sure that we're taking care of self in the process.
Yes, and I want to thank our content producer, Guernica Williams, for reaching out to these powerful men.
Yes.
Our engineer back in the building.
Yes.
Uchenna. Woo-woo. And all of our special guests, thanks for tuning in. Question of the Day, the show where all voices and opinions matter. phone line.
Started really 2 nights ago.
Really?
WOLB Baltimore, a Radio 1 station where information is power.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
You know what? That just shows that we have some great men coming through the show. We had Dr. Margaret Clark, Steve Perry, Fabidi,
All good brothers.
yeah, Jay Hollingshed, and everything you said today, they have said on the show.